If you are a lady out there in your late 30s, 40s, 50s, we have an interesting and I would say very valuable and insightful episode for you as we're going to get into peri and post menopause, specifically around some of the hormonal issues when it comes to training, weight loss, weight gain, cortisol. We're going to take a little bit of a slice into a complex topic and we're going to shed some light on something that I think will be really helpful. Welcome, everyone. Dr. Annie Chryssie, thanks for coming into the studio today. And let's take this deep dive into this really complex and murky area for a lot of people as they're getting into these menopause conditions and trying to figure it out. You guys have brought up a topic today that you feel like there's a lot of questions about and a lot of misinformation about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we really wanted to focus in on how perimenopausal and menopausal women should be training specifically. There's a lot of misinformation out there in regards to training as a whole for us when it comes to cortisol, right? And there's this whole huge movement on cortisol and zone 2 training for women. Zone 2 training is more like a recovery workout. It's a steady state endurance style training, which has been promoted to women to not elevate cortisol. And so the whole myth is that cortisol makes you gain weight. It's a real misunderstanding. So a lot of women are hitting the zone 2 training. They're not resistance training because that's what they think they should be doing. So I think it's important just to talk a little bit about cortisol because cortisol, it does elevate when we do a high intensity type of exercise, but that's good, right? Cortisol elevation in response to stress increases our fuel, so blood glucose. It increases our alertness, our cognition, and increases the rate of protein turnover. And cortisol is a massive and potent anti-inflammatory, right? Mm-hmm. So the opposite of what we're being told cortisol does. I mean, cortisol keeps us alive. We have to keep this in mind. But where we get into trouble is when we have more of a chronic cortisol output. And that is really due to life stress. Life stress also includes perimenopause and menopause because of the hormone dysregulation. But also, chronic stress from kids, work, jobs, the wrong type of training, and the wrong type of diet can all put us in sort of this low-level kind of chronic cortisol output. And at that stage, cortisol becomes negative, right? Yeah. It becomes catabolic. It becomes an inflammatory hormone, and it's dysregulated. So we can get a widespread a disease spectrum from chronic elevated cortisol. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important to differentiate that and talk about how to train within that realm with that different knowledge base.
Yeah, so when we're looking at this topic and we're just looking at the whole kind of spectrum of menopausal, advice, myths, misconceptions, what to do. So this is kind of a slice into training in a kind of connection to the cortisol, just to get clarified. It's like, that's one of those things that a lot of people tend to have a lot of different ideas about and hear a lot of different misinformation about. So you're saying cortisol actually isn't the root of the problem.
Right.
You're saying cortisol can be a good thing when it's dysregulated systemically from a bunch of other stuff, including diet and lifestyle and whatever. Then cortisol dysregulation can be an issue. But when it comes to kind of the menopause situation in training, don't think about cortisol as your enemy, and instead don't think about maybe type this like zone 2 training as your best friend. And so what would we suggest then to people kind of think about this differently then?
Women are also better endurance athletes than men, right? And so we can actually take more zone 2 training than men can. Mm-hmm. So we really need to shift the narrative to a high intensity combined with resistance training, plyometric type of training program.
Yeah, focusing on strength, power, fast twitch, especially as we age. We've got our slow and our fast twitch fibers, and the fast twitch are those that are going to leave us if we don't train them. Our body is also very adaptive, right? So if we're constantly training in this zone 2, we're training that slow twitch. But if we focus on training that fast twitch, that power, that strength, that is how we are going to age. And that's what allows us to live the life that we desire to live as we grow older.
Interesting. So you're kind of getting into these energy systems, basically. So we have different energy systems in our body that tie into both energy utilization as well as muscle activation and these different energy pathways. And so essentially we're kind of highlighting how for many people, especially who we're talking about here as they get into their 40s and 50s, they're leaning really heavily on this steady state endurance, running for 30, 40, 60 minutes, elliptical training, long cycling bike classes.
They're slowing down because they maybe didn't identify that they're going through menopause yet. So they may be lacking estrogen, but they don't know it. And as they start to lose estrogen, things start to hurt because women's bodies need estrogen to function. So they're relying on those training ways or different training structures that don't hurt. So they're walking, they're jogging, they're on the elliptical, they're avoiding the strength training.
And we might have some energy issues going on, energy fluctuations.
Such a slippery slope. I mean, this is all happening, right? So women are like reducing their training. They're eating less because they're gaining a little bit of weight. So they're putting themselves in a dysfunctional state there with not getting enough food and fuel in their body. Yeah, it's just a slippery slope. So they're doing all this like low intensity training where they need to instead speed up mitochondrial function, right? And they need to up their estrogen. And that all comes from resistance training. So if you get and you're doing hard weight lifting, like lifting heavy until failure, and then you're comparing that with like a plyometric, intense jumping type of workout where you're getting that explosive speed and power back, that is just a game changer for how you're going to be able to function through your menopausal years. And we have to talk about really that window of building muscle is now for us.
Yes.
Right? And most of my patients are like, well, I'm like, what are you doing for exercise? They're like, I walk 2 or 3 times a week. I walk my dog. And that is just so insufficient. I mean, I hate to say it. I'm glad you're getting fresh air. But that's all it is fresh air.
Yeah.
And a little bit of recovery and maybe some peace of mind, which is super important with cortisol regulation. But we have to get that other piece in. It's just absolutely mandatory. Because what happens when we turn 60? It gets even harder.
Yeah, 100%. 30, 40, 50. I mean, we should have gained that strength and as we should have built up that muscle reserve when we were in our 20s and our 30s. And if we missed it, you still have time in your 40s and your 50s, but 60s, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, it's better if you have a base. It's like if you've been camping, and you wake up in the morning and there's still some coals in the fire. It's way easier to get that fire blazing again if there's some coals.
Yep.
That's your muscle reserve, right? And so if you've missed the opportunity to build it, that means you're coming into things a little flat-footed.
Yeah.
It's just getting started is the key. So even if you find yourself in your 60s and 70s, it's not too late. But for everybody listening who's in their 40s and 50s, this is the perfect time to really be focusing in on shifting your resistance training, especially as women, into something that is going to support you from a hormonal standpoint, from an energy standpoint, and set you up to really be in the best position from a health, longevity, energy, mental function, all of these things as you continue to then progress in your life. So how would a person get started? What would be the recommendation? What would we say if we have like, oh, wait a minute, if somebody's saying, this is me, I've been doing that kind of steady state and you're right, it hasn't really been working. I feel like maybe I still have excess belly fat, or I kind of feel like I have that quote unquote spare tire or that middle section, hips, butt, belly, and my energy sucks and I'm doing the steady state and doesn't seem to be shifting my body at all, my energy at all. What would we then suggest as maybe some starting points to shift?
Well, don't stop eating, change how you're eating. I mean, right away we stop eating, right? We think I have to eat less, I have to lose weight. It's a cortisol belly, it's all this and that. But I mean, the first thing to do is to address both diet and then get some help with your weight training. Like if you don't know how to weight train, if you haven't been weight training in your life, you need to get someone to coach you through it so you don't get injured. So I think it's really important to start with, dissecting your diet, right? Increasing your protein, looking at maybe what is causing your belly fat. Keep in mind too that when you hit perimenopause and menopause, we gain belly fat, I think it's 10% visceral fat.
Insulin resistant.
Right. And so I think getting help from someone qualified like Chryssie with the Build program to kind of look at your macros, look at your diet, try to figure out why you actually have belly fat. Maybe you're allergic to something. Maybe you're drinking and eating lots of sugar and flour products. But most women just then they deprive themselves and they do more and more, walking, running, that type of exercise, spend hours on the treadmill trying to slim back down again. And they feel worse and worse, right? They're in this energy depletion syndrome and they're feeling terrible. They're exhausted, fatigued, cortisol's going up at this stage now in a negative way.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of stop and start again. And usually most people need some help with that process.
Yeah, and get you moving in a different way, to your point, Barry. Like if you're at the zone tour and you're just like walking and stuff, what more can you do? Because obviously that's not leading the results that you're looking for. Let's get you squatting. Let's get you pushing. Let's get you pulling, hinging, lunging. Like let's get that body moving through different planes and being challenged in different ways. So it does stimulate that muscle. And then once we get those foundational movement patterns down, let's start loading you. Let's start adding weight to that body and let's start building.
I think that's
I'm
fantastic.
excited.
Yeah, me too.
I'm ready to go pump it up.
Yeah, I think it starts with the question of like, hey, are you doing a self-assessment and you're saying this resonates? You're right. Essentially what I'm doing now isn't really working or bringing me the results I want. That's really a great spot to say, okay, I want to get information from somebody I can trust and somebody who knows the path and the process and who can guide me along the way. And if you're just out there searching, asking Dr. Google or cruising through Instagram or TikTok, you're going to get 101 million ways to try and answer this problem. You're going to be drinking apple cider vinegar and you're going to be doing the cucumber diet.
Definitely apple cider vinegar.
No, for sure. Then you're going to be on carnivore the next week.
Yeah.
And you're just going to be eating raw liver. And it's just going to be a wild and terrible ride.
Totally.
And instead, you could just literally give Chryssie a call or talk to us and get started on a process where at least you can get some guidance.
Yeah.
And that might start with something like coming in and doing an in-body and talking with Chryssie just to get a starting point on where, metabolically where you're at, muscle mass to body fat percentage, and then understanding like, okay, here's maybe from a diet, lifestyle standpoint, things to consider. And then you can figure out what that path is. But know that just doing that steady state cardio and, turn into wine therapy,
Yes.
At 6 p.m. Isn't going to get you there.
I love wine therapy.
Listen, I have a whole other podcast to talk about wine therapy and what it can do for you and what it can't do for you.
do for you.
There's many things it cannot do for you, and there's a few things that it can. But the point being, there's resources, and we'll put some of those links in the show notes. And really, this is just one where we're kind of sounding that alarm bell and just raising that big billboard up to say, hey, there's a better way. If you find yourself in that position, we're here for you. We can point you in the direction of other people who can help, people like Sage Integrative to get hormonal testing done, various things like that. So it's a process, but we want you to get started if it's something that you want to do for yourself.
Absolutely.
We'll catch you on the next episode. Until next time, remember, movement is the best medicine.